I knew he was going to do it. No, Louis, I never ended up with the thing to put my logo on. It's disappeared.
We're live now, Alan. So, sorry, I was on mute. Great start. Welcome, welcome everyone to the Recruiters Hangout Christmas special. Thank you for joining us. I hope we're on time today. This is going to be a good hangout. This is our last of the year. If you want to join us, as always, with questions and comments, please do so. The hashtag is RecHangout on Twitter. Please also head to Google Plus to our event page where you can use the Q&A app to send in questions. Louise Triance from UK Recruiter, who sponsors this hangout, will be keeping an eye on Twitter. I, Louis Welcomme, colleague software, will be keeping an eye on Q&A app. We're joined today by Katharine Robinson from Sourcing Hat. Katharine's very well known for as a sourcing expert. I think is the best description in the industry. Tons of experience, has been made GrandMaster Sourcer, bestowed by SourceCon a couple of years back. I like that title. And we are talking, surprisingly, about the art of sourcing top talent, and we're going to get some tips and advice from Katharine for the following year and what's going on really and what's trending. I'm joined by co-hosts Mark Stevens from Smart, from F10, from Tira. Mark's a co-sponsor here, and we're also joined by our main host, Alan Whitford from Abtech and RC Euro. So, Alan, I think I've said enough, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks very much, Louis, and I'm glad you came off mute, so that's a lesson for all of us to remember to do that when it's time to talk. Welcome, everybody, to our final show of the year, and as you can tell from Katharine, she's decided to make it a very Christmas cheery special. Katharine, we need to see the entire sweater, so let's see the rest of the baubles, please, and then we'll know when we're there. There we go. Yes. Fantastic. It's a Christmas special. Not for children. This is an adults-only show, obviously.
I have more baubles.
It's a great show. Oh, and more baubles. We're good to go. And as Louis said at the start, it's a very serious show we run here at Rec Hangout with only serious questions taken, but we'll actually take questions on clothing tips as well from Katharine. We're going to talk about sourcing, and Kath and I chatted a little bit earlier, and I think we might want to figure out what does this sourcing actually mean to begin with. It's been a topic that, I've been a sourcer for most of my adult life in recruitment. You've got to find candidates and then figure out what to do with them. But it's become its own little universal, trendy topic, I guess, called sourcing. And Kath and I promised we weren't going to tell the Americans how well she kicked their butts 4.5 years ago, but I'm starting up with that anyway. Because she did go kick the Americans at their own game. But what it really did, though, was also a highlight here in the UK and in Europe. The sourcing thing wasn't a black art per se. It was something that actually was really important, and companies and agencies alike should be doing it. So, Katharine, I guess welcome aboard. Hopefully you enjoy the next hour. What is sourcing? What does that actually mean?
That's probably one of the toughest questions. Thanks, Alan, for the intro.
I thought I'd make it easy for you to start.
I thought I'd just dazzle you with my Christmas game, and you wouldn't ask me any tough questions. But hey, So I suppose I've been hearing the word sourcing since I joined a little exec search business back in kind of 2008, and that was my introduction to this world. I suppose then it was this sort of mysterious thing that you did on the internet, and I think I probably came in, halfway through or near the end of the beginning of the story in a way, because obviously people have been looking for candidates since the dawn of time, since the beginning of recruitment itself. So the internet is just something that has augmented what we were already doing as recruiters. It's definitely my strong point. I think if it's out there and it's findable, I can probably find it. So that's definitely my strength. When it comes to getting on the phone and kind of finding candidates that way. I do it, but it's not the bit that I enjoy, and I don't really consider it my strength. But so I suppose I think I've been talking to people for a few years now about almost flavors of sourcer. You have sourcers with different strengths. I think it's something that's become quite nuanced in itself. But yeah, what actually is it? I think you mentioned SourceCon, an event especially for sourcers. It's been running in the US since 2007. I remember the year that I won the GrandMaster title, I saw Eric Jakefus do a presentation about sourcing, and sort of he tried to tackle the what is sourcing question. And at that time, I think one of his ideas was that it was sort of the first third of the recruitment process, sort of anything that brought a candidate into the process. So that covered a multitude of sins, whereas it's really evolved since then. Most people are talking about sourcing as more the identification and engagement of somebody that perhaps didn't think they were looking for a job. It's the people that we, as companies and recruiters, go out and we approach rather than waiting for them to come to us. So sourcing has almost become another word for a headhunt. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how much it's evolved over the last 4, 5, 6 years, to where we are now. The answer is I don't really know.
But I think you're right. If we look at it as the first third of the process, so when I'm in a client now, I'll say, okay, we have to source candidates. Let's start with that. If we haven't got candidates coming into our pipeline in some way, shape, manner, or form, then we don't have anybody to interview. We don't have anybody to hire. But that sourcing may use a job board. It may use a print media. It may use a recruitment agency. It may use a full-fledged search firm or a talent mapping company or a sourcing specialist like yourself. But the very first thing, I think, is to try and get the HR recruitment departments, particularly in-house, to think about, if I was in the manufacturing part of the business and you said sourcing, I know exactly what you meant. I knew that I got to go to the cornfield in Ohio and I've got to order my corn, and then it's going to go through a process, and then it's going to show up in my factory, and then it's going to come out the other end as sugar syrup or whatever it's going to be. I know what sourcing is. We talk about recruitment to the hiring managers and we say sourcing. They actually don't seem to understand. They think that candidates just mythically appear in the pipeline. So is there an element of training that has to be training the HR manager and the recruiter about what this process is in itself before we get down to those nitty-gritty specifics of the best ways to source?
Yeah, I suppose in a lot of ways I would, what you're talking about is just part of recruiting. And I sort of always seen sourcing as almost something, you can be doing recruiting, you can be doing direct hiring without necessarily doing any sourcing. You could just post a job somewhere on a job board and wait for some applicants to come in. I suppose in a way you are sourcing those candidates. They're coming from somewhere. They're not just magically appearing in the process. But whether I would say, is that actually sourcing? A lot of the definitions of sourcing that I hear people talking about, it's more, when you've gone out and sort of said, that's the person that we want, or that person looks interesting to us, how are we going to engage them, rather than just, well, this is what we got, who wants it? And so yeah, I suppose there's a conversation even before that sourcing can take place, is, well, yeah, what is your recruitment process, where before you can bolt sourcing on, you need a process to bolt it on to. What process do the candidates go through once they magically appear? What is our offering to them? How do we, once they've applied to the job, how do we keep them interested in the job? Before you can then go out and approach somebody directly and say, well, and start to tempt them, you've got to have, I suppose, done that initial groundwork. And so, yeah, I think is the answer. There's other things that need to happen before. Yeah, I think a lot of the conversations that we have around sourcing and all the Boolean strings and things that come up, and that's all stuff that you do when you've run out of other ideas, when there's nobody left for you to talk to on the phone, and there's there's no more candidates that you can get out of Monster's CV database, and where do you go? It's always that what else is left, and how much further can you take it? I suppose that's sort of an envelope I'm always trying to push, but most people don't need to be, I suppose, pushing that envelope.
Well, but I think there are some that do need that pushing. If I just look at the situation I'm in now, where recruitment was all about call an agency, but that's been kind of a default UK mentality for years. I mean, why is our recruitment agency marketplace as large as the U.S. is, as large as Japan's? For a country that is much smaller than those two countries in terms of population and amount of jobs. So recruitment sourcing was, put an ad. I'll go way back into Computer Talk if you wanted computer operators, or into Computer Weekly if you wanted IT people, or you knew where to go find candidates based on the vertical publication or based on the agency that you called. And as job boards evolved and we went into post and pray, or spray and hope, whichever way we want to look at it, that changed a bit, and that allowed those conversations about sourcing had to be more focused and more channeled to identify where the right people. But I think you're right. If we still don't have an understanding of what it is we're looking for, how are we going to engage with them once they get here? What is that process that we can deliver? I could ask you to go find me that nuclear engineer or that food scientist, and you'll identify a bunch of people tomorrow, but what then? If they get turned off at my door, well, we've both wasted our time, haven't we? And I think Mark wanted to talk to you about the engagement side. When you do go out and talk to them, what are you actually telling them? Mark, what was that? Was that the theme you were thinking about?
Yeah, well, I picked up on a couple of things that Katharine said, in terms of trying to define what sourcing is. I guess that any means that a recruiter can apply to attract candidates into a pipeline is a form of sourcing. But what I'm hearing is that in its purest form, it's targeting passive candidates. Finding a candidate online somewhere, identifying something from something they've said or in their profile, or making a judgment based on how they work, and then engaging with that person. So what I'm interested in is, because you said also that it's a bit like headhunting, and that just made me think about some of the training we used to do with our recruiters here in terms of their engagement strategy. Do you have a specific engagement strategy, how you introduce yourself, how you warm them to the idea of engaging with you about a potential opportunity? Can you share some of that with us, perhaps?
Yeah, I suppose my background mainly is almost research support to other people. So, for most of my career, I've handed that engagement piece over to somebody else. Being completely honest, really, I just spent a year doing kind of 3 days a week as part of the PepsiCo TA team. So I sort of, that gave me a bit of an introduction to sort of getting my hands dirty with the engagement bit, as well as just the rooting around and finding people bit. So yeah, I suppose that was a real sort of steep learning curve. How do you get people to want to have a conversation with you? And I think it worked best when the more honest you can be and the more real information you can give to a candidate, the better. I think being able, obviously it was so much easier working with an in-house team and be able to, so people knew who the job was with immediately. There was no kind of secrecy over, I've got, my client is looking for X. Being able to say who the client is immediately makes something more tempting. What will the salary be? Giving them some idea. What exactly is it they're going to be doing? Who will their hiring manager be? Just the more sort of honest information you can give someone, the better. I suppose, to be completely honest, we used a lot of in-mail. We had it as a feature. Why not? And actually, the response rates were pretty good. And so, why not use it? So
LinkedIn
we were finding, LinkedIn. So one of the things that I found got a much better response was when I got the hiring manager to kind of put together a little sort of PDF summary of some of the achievements that their team had come up with, things like that, and just kind of attaching that with an in-mail. It doesn't, because then you don't get that big sort of waffly in-mail that nobody really wants to read. But if you do kind of spark their interest, there's something else for them to look at. That message becomes a little bit stickier. They look at it for a little bit longer. And yet it isn't this sort of massive essay that somebody has to read when when they first open an email, which completely turns them off. So that being able to engage somebody that does have a little bit of interest and and captivate that interest and keep it and sort of convince them that this really is a genuine role. All that kind of helps, I think. And then obviously there's just getting to actually talk to them at the end of the phone as quickly as possible, I think. Because I think nothing ever feels as real as when you can hear someone's voice and really get a feel for, are they liking this idea? Aren't they? Being able to speak to somebody instantly makes something real. You're real to them, they're real to you. You instantly care a little bit more about everything. So, getting to a conversation as quickly as possible.
There's not a huge amount of nurturing going on then. It's it's engaging with them, giving them a bit of information, test the water a little bit to see what they're interested in, and then get somebody on the phone talking to them.
Yeah, and even as a recruiter, we don't always have all the answers either. Those relationships with hiring managers, I think, are just as important. So, whether you're a recruiter in-house or a recruiter at, working in an agency or an exec search, those relationships that you have with your client are essential. You have to be able to know you can quickly get an answer to a candidate's question, or that you can put the candidate in touch with the hiring manager quickly. That support from hiring managers was really, really sort of vital part of that. Engaging those candidates.
So I'm going to talk about Toby Culshaw, and we've got some good people piling in already, and it's good to hear that Bernadette is watching us again from the U.S. I mentioned you to her earlier. Just because she likes listening to what we talk about. But Toby is talking about, okay, so I mentioned the whole manufacturing idea. He goes, well, but do you really care about the supply chain and procurement? Where did my laptop come from? Where did my product come from? So he kind of feels that maybe is it the same with hiring managers? They don't really care about what method we're using to fill their supply chain. They just want to know that somebody's going to show up for an interview. How do we keep them engaged in this then? Because I think, I don't necessarily agree with Toby. I think there is a lot of that thinking, but if I'm going to start engaging and going after people directly rather than expecting them to apply to me, then I need to be able to engage them quickly. I need to be able to be confident, as you've said, that there's going to be a conversation with a hiring manager who really means it, and that is interested in being part of this process. If they've just applied to a job on my website, wherever they've applied, they've kind of already half bought into that part. They've already decided they know who Pepsi is or Tate & Lyle is or whoever it is that we're working for. But if I'm going after them direct, I got to have a story, but you got to be confident that the hiring manager supports you. So how do we get that buy-in from the hiring manager that he or she should be part of our sourcing pipeline process?
I think it's sort of, well, how much pain are they in, really? How much do they want that candidate? I suppose if they aren't willing to do that engagement bit, then I'm not going to be sourcing them passive candidates, really, because there's sort of little point, because you will lose them. So I think it's it's a give and take. The more they put in, the more they get out. But I'm sort of seeing more and more conversations, in forums and with people in recruitment talking about, educating the person doing an interview. A lot of companies run kind of interview skills sessions for their interviewers, and actually now there's a whole different education around, well, you're interviewing someone, it might not even be for a particular role right now. So it's a very different conversation to, say, somebody who has applied to a very specific job. If it's just somebody that is good and you probably want to hire them for a role at some time in the next 18 months, it's a very different conversation. And I think it can really turn off a candidate if, they kind of come in and get grilled as if they've applied to a very specific role, when as far as they're concerned, they're coming in for a coffee. So, I think, that happens a couple of times and you realise, oh, goodness me, we've lost a couple of great people because, not everyone really understood where the candidates were coming from. What was the journey of the product to, to coming in and sort of sitting in front of you. So, yeah, I think it is important to understand where the candidates come from. And if you don't want to do that, then,
it's probably not going to
get as good candidates.
Yeah. Well, it kind of works as Mark Gilsgaisford is also wanting to know about how this kind of moves seamlessly into talent pipelining. And, should we be doing that in the so-called candidate short market? Someone like Greg Savage, who's been one of our guests here on Rec Hangout before, would talk about half of his placements might come from that talent pipeline. I've got a kind of an issue with talent pipelines. But look, I created the phrase talent pool down to talent puddle quite a long time ago. But we can have a talent pipeline, and it looks good on the surface, and you could go out and source me a talent map and create that pipeline. But if I haven't got any jobs that people are actually really going to want to apply for, why do I want to be in your talent pipeline at PepsiCo? What's in it for me?
I mean, should the person even know that they're kind of in it? They should just know that there's a recruiter at Pepsi that I sometimes talk to. I think that's more than, I don't think they should think I'm being pipelined. But it's almost some roles.
Everyone watching, you're being pipelined now.
I mean, you start feeling like you're, I don't know, sort of escaping from Shawshank prison. I'm in my anyway. Mental. Yeah, it's sometimes it's appropriate. I mean, if you know that you're going to hire 10 salespeople this year, why would you not be having conversations with great salespeople that you think would fit in your business and sort of introducing them to people in the business, inviting them in to see what the office is like, and generally kind of just getting to know them, letting them know that you're interested, but there isn't anything specific right now. But there is going to be. That over the next 12 months there will be X number of roles, because there will be. I think in that context, then yeah, you should absolutely be doing that. But for stuff where you don't know, yeah, it's sort of that sort of uncomfortable, I'm just talking to you because you look like the right sort of person, but I don't know if there will ever be a job ever. That could just lead to, the candidate feeling like they've been led on, like you're making promises you can't fulfill. It's awkward. So, and I think in the end you end up turning candidates off from your brand, from your company, and yeah, so I think, yes, if you know the requirement is coming, then you should be doing that pipelining, putting people in pools, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's not always appropriate, I think. Sometimes you have to, I suppose, just kind of sometimes do the work without, do some of the work without the engagement piece, and just treat it more like just-in-time recruitment.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. If I'm sourcing people for a specific role, and that role is not right, then your logical thing is, okay, well, but you've already expressed an interest in the company we're sourcing you for. Do you want to stay involved? Do you want to stay in touch? But I still wouldn't use the word, I'm sticking you in my talent pipeline or my talent funnel. Because that's pretty much like, oh, great, I need to go get my galoshes, Mark, to walk through my talent funnel. So, yeah, I get that. You're right. But so there's that subtle approach is, if I'm starting to identify talent, if we look at how the talent mapping organizations work, they're trying to identify people that are of a specific skill set in a specific geography or whatever it might be. And that's fine, but as soon as they flick the switch on and put an email in or an in-mail or a phone call and start talking about a specific employer, we've opened up a different expectation on the candidate's page. So is that expectation, how do we manage that? Are you going to actually, if you're doing a project for a Pepsi or another client, are you going to just talk to people without having a specific client in mind? Or would you always want to talk to them, hey, here's a specific job, a specific client?
Oh, yeah, I suppose if I was working with, it's been a long time since I worked in a recruitment business in a particular niche. But sometimes there are those people that at some point you will place. There are those candidates that are just good, and you always stay in touch with them. And also sometimes you have those relationships with your clients where you can know, well, they're going to hire 10 great salespeople this year, so you can be having those conversations in a similar way that an internal recruiter kind of has a client in their hiring manager. But yeah, and I suppose equally, if you're in if you're working in a recruitment business, you have the opportunity to say, well, this candidate is great, I'm going to take them out to market and actually find them a job. So from that point of view, you can be looking for candidates that will be placeable, and essentially building a pipeline or a pool or a puddle. But yeah, again, I probably wouldn't be telling them they were in that. I'm just I'm just a recruiter that works in their industry, and and yeah, there might sort of one day be an opportunity in it for them. But I think that honesty, that you know what, that role I put you forward to, it's not happening. That needs to be kind of said at some point if it isn't. Because I think that notion of somebody feeling like they're being strung along is really sort of quite toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do a quick reset here. Hi, this is Rec Hangout. We're talking today with Katharine Robinson, also known as the Sourceress, about what makes good sourcing. We're going to get into some tips, tricks, and tools in a minute, but we've been talking about, yeah, I know, I'd warned her of that. Yeah. We've been talking about the background. What is good sourcing? Do we do talent pipelining? Do we do talent pooling or talent puddling? What's just good behavior when we're dealing with candidates and prospective candidates, and how do we get our hiring managers engaged? We're joined, obviously, by our stalwart crew of Louis Welcomme managing the tech and keeping it going from colleague, Louise Triance monitoring Twitter, and Mark Stevens, our third co-host, actually jumping in with some good questions as we go. Katharine, we do have a couple of questions kind of moving over to some methodologies of sourcing, and obviously most people today think LinkedIn as soon as they think sourcing. You mentioned earlier you've done some good stuff using in-mails with PepsiCo on that process, and we've had Ben and Terry wanting to ask us about that. Do you think what would be a good response rate for in-mails? And do I need to have a recruiter license, or can I do it with the free license?
I think LinkedIn's one of those things that, it's not an advantage anymore. Everyone has LinkedIn, and almost everyone is paying for it as well. When I say everyone, I mean recruiters. So, it in no way is going to set you apart from what your competitors are doing. I think just sort of be careful in thinking that because you're using LinkedIn, you're sort of covering all bases, because you're probably not. LinkedIn say that a 30% response rate is good, but I think you've also got to bear in mind that 70% of people who are not responding. So sort of what is so there's a question there around well, what am I going to do with that other 70% of people, because you don't know if they've seen your message and chosen to ignore it, or if they haven't even seen your message. It goes to some secondary email address. They don't log into LinkedIn. You just you don't know what the reason is that those 70% hasn't replied. So yeah, there's always got to be that. Well, there's that fine line then. Well, do I try and contact them again in another way? And then if that doesn't work, do I try another way? At what point if they have seen my messages, at what point does it become stalkery and over the top? So there has to be some cutoff point. You have to decide, well, what is our brand? What is pushy for us? Are we just going to go out and get those people no matter what? Or, do we try and contact them, 2 or 3 times and then, that's it. They obviously either weren't interested or are just really unavailable. So yeah, I think just relying solely on in-mail is really a mistake. But I think if you are getting above that 30% response rate, and you have access to that as a business, it's something that I'd consider using. It does work in quite a lot of cases. You can fill roles with it, so why wouldn't you use it? And also with everyone else using LinkedIn, it's kind of, well, you kind of got to be there, haven't you? But yeah, it's not the only thing, and I think that is a trap that a lot of recruiters seem to be falling into. Is that, well, I'm using LinkedIn, therefore I'm doing social recruiting, I'm doing sourcing, I'm making direct hires now. But we're seeing a lot of people getting turned off from LinkedIn, especially that sort of techie community. Those people who were probably early adopters are sort of falling away, taking their profiles down, taking information off their profiles to make them harder to find. Putting messages on their profiles saying recruiters, please do not get in touch with me, things like that. We're seeing that more and more. So at some point, people will. It won't be there forever, or it might not be there forever. So, I think it's sort of always something to have in the back of your mind that, LinkedIn isn't the only thing out there. Not everyone is on it, and not everyone will stay on it.
Well, I think that's a good point. Even with the numbers they have, if we still think it may only still be 50 to 60% of the potential UK audience. So that's 40% that aren't there. So we do need to think about other alternatives. But I do think it's interesting too, of what can we do with that in-mail response rate. You're right, it's a nice marketing spin that you're 30% successful instead of 70% unsuccessful. Although I'm going to say, I'm just looking at a tweet to Louise put it, Dan Fitz, 1983. I guess that's when you were born, Dan. Says that at team, subtle use of your ID and keeping your private details safe and secure. But he says that Team PepsiCo UK achieved a 45% LinkedIn response rate after working with the Sourceress.
Oh, thank you very much, Dan.
Yes, so you improved them tremendously. So with some of that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more and then move to some other areas, but I see with some of the people that I work with on using the in-mails that I try and get them to personalize the message. Say why you found them, why you're getting in touch. This is a job I'm trying to look for people, and you came up. If you're interested in having a chat with me, here's how to get hold of me. If it's the wrong time, that's great. Sorry if I bothered you, let me know. But I think, have a conversation, not just hit the send in-mail button, which is, hi, saw your stuff, want to talk. Because personally, as I receive those, I'm kind of like, go away. But if I get something that looks like someone spent a little bit of time actually creating a message that I might be interested in reading, do you think that makes a difference, or do you see a long message coming and you go, oh, crap, I can't read all of that, and just go away?
I think the length of message is a whole debate on its own. I mean, some people swear by really short messages, other people swear by putting loads of detail, and I think it's just, what works for you and your writing style. I think individuals can get good responses from both, but definitely that personalization. I remember I met a recruiter several years ago. I think the LinkedIn recruiter product was fairly new, and he used a wonderful phrase, which I sort of bring out all the time when I'm talking about this. And he said, I just do a search on LinkedIn, and I select the first 100 people, and I machine gun them with in-mails. And I thought, oh my God. But at the time, that was working for him, I suppose, because they probably weren't getting tons of in-mail yet. It was all fairly new. And, I suppose if you do machine gun 100 people, a blind squirrel occasionally finds a nut, right? So, yeah, but I don't really think that's a sustainable thing to be doing. And I think, even if you got 5 responses from that, that's 95 people you've potentially annoyed, that you've potentially sent an inappropriate message to. So, people that just aren't going to be interested, and they can look at that and go, you even looked at my profile? So I think you really have to convince that person that you have looked at their profile. So kind of job one is actually look at every profile that you send an email to. I think that's definitely one of the things that we're doing with PepsiCo. Make sure you go and you actually, when you look at your LinkedIn stats, it should match up, that you should have looked at more profiles than you've sent in mail. Otherwise, something's gone wrong there. That sounds obvious, but it's not always the case, and things like picking out things so that people do actually know you've looked at them. I mean, at PepsiCo we were using in-mail templates, but we would go in every time and alter the template for every single candidate. Mention the companies that they've worked at, the specific experience, pick things off their profiles that they've done. I mean, rather than rewriting a message every single time and risking things like typos and stuff coming in. But there's still not a reason to bulk send in-mail. I think that's one of the worst things that recruiters can be doing is kind of just sending blanket messages out. So yeah, that just creates a marked improvement in response rate, is those personalized messages. Absolutely.
And what do you do with that response? So we'll stay on LinkedIn and in-mail for a minute or two more, but so you've done the in-mail, it's gone out, you're getting some response back. Is best practice to keep doing it within LinkedIn, or do you want to get them out of LinkedIn and into a direct conversation as soon as possible?
I suppose I'm always looking to get to the conversation, that making everything real. But, everyone is in a different situation. So I think it's almost candidate-led to some degree. Do they hit the reply button on the email? Or have they replied through LinkedIn? Little things like that can sort of help you gauge how they want to be interacted with. Have they just picked up the phone to you? then and left you a voicemail, or you pick up your phone and oh, here's the candidate I emailed. How do they want to communicate with you, and kind of let them lead. But I suppose even if they are coming back to me via LinkedIn or via email, I'm trying to get a time to speak to them on the phone, because that's really how you get to the bottom of whether or not they're interested and appropriate for the opportunity you've got. So yeah, I think let them lead to some degree, but I'm always trying to get them on the phone.
I don't know whether we lost Alan. Are you still there, Alan?
Still here, but I was following Louis and being on mute.
We have got very intermittent networking issues. I think that Louise has dropped off, and I know you lost me for a second, but it was a good opportunity for me to go and get some stuff for my product placement. Thanks to the guys. And these McVitie's breakfast cereal bars, get through quite a lot of those at the moment.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, so obviously you're trying to sell to McVitie's, so it's good that you've got them up there so they can call you now. Yeah.
I keep seeing these people in product placements and in the data with free gifts.
Well, we do have the Tesco sweater that Catherine's wearing, so obviously we all want to bop down there tomorrow and pick up our own. Well, we do have some more. We've got so trying to move us off of LinkedIn a little bit. So Terry and Ben are back. They're very active, obviously, in trying to compete for questioning for us. If we're saying we're only going to get sort of 30% success out of LinkedIn, and we're going to put you on the spot in a second, what would be your top 3 areas for sourcing? If it's not going to be LinkedIn. And Ben wonders what the impact of social aggregator tools are in terms of actually finding the direct contact details rather than just depending on the messaging within the individual social channel. So sort of a double-headed one there for you.
Yeah, okay, so top 3 areas. I suppose it very much depends on the kind of business that I'm working in for. I suppose if you have got an ATS system with plenty of candidates on it, then kind of that's awesome, because you know that there are people who have already engaged with you about working with you. They're already warm to some extent. You've probably got very good information about them. You've probably got contact details already. It's much, you start, you're already partway into the process. You can cut out all that time spent searching, all that time spent kind of going through profiles on LinkedIn, all that time, sending messages, writing messages, kind of cut out all that time of going back and forth trying to find a time to speak on the phone. All that's kind of gone. You have their phone number, they're kind of interested. You could just call them up and see what's going on. So if you've got an ATS, then and you can search it. That seems to be a problem that I often come across. People just, their internal databases aren't working well for them. But if you do have a database that is working well for you, then I'd say that's probably a really good place to start. Also, I suppose it's almost tempting to forget that job boards have CV databases, or some recruiters seem to have forgotten that is still a thing. So I mean, those candidates are often it's a similar scenario to your own database. It's a warm call, not quite as warm as somebody who's on your own ATS, but yeah, it's sort of I suppose easy pickings in a way. If you can find somebody to call, that that's going to be a much better call than perhaps 10 sort of just speculative calls hoping to get somebody with the right job title. So yeah, I think kind of don't rule out those those sort of obvious old school kind of things, and just kind of a bit of poking around on Google. I think if LinkedIn disappeared tomorrow, I'd want to hope that I had a decent, database of my own that I could search, and I'd want to know I had Google, absolutely, because essentially anything that's out there in the public domain, and Google has managed to index it, which is a heck of a lot of stuff. There's a lot of names to be found there, and then I suppose it's just a case of trying to phone these people up, or trying to figure out an email address for them. I would really, really be lost without just a decent search engine. So other search engines are available, but I think we all default back to Google kind of as a bad habit. But yeah, it's probably the one I'd choose if I could only choose one. So
do you go in with a raw search on Google, Katharine, or do you use any open web tools for accessing and sourcing candidates, for digging into these repositories like Stack Overflow and GitHub?
I think, I've had a look at a couple of these aggregator tools. The most recent one I've seen was kind of Open Web from the guys at DICE and the IT Job Board, and that's looking really nice. And I think for if I was running a recruitment team, I think I would be seriously considering, do I put my money into LinkedIn recruiter licenses, or do I put my money into a tool like that? Because really, if someone's has a LinkedIn public profile, those tools are going to find them, and they also root out and find a lot of other really rich, useful information. And sort of one of the little killer features actually on the Open Web tool that I really liked was the fact that it told you how active people were across the different networks. So, if you were looking for developers or something, you would immediately see if they were active on LinkedIn or not, and it would immediately tell you, well, that's why I haven't had a response from them, because they're just not there. But they use Twitter all the time, or they use Google Plus all the time, or they're really, there's not a day goes by when they don't use Stack Overflow. So, that would be a channel where I'd be more likely to, to be able to engage with them. I think, perhaps method of engagement might be slightly different, but, I think as long as you kind of, your way around the internet, you're kind of going to be okay. So, yeah, I think I would be seriously considering some of those aggregator tools, because LinkedIn costs a lot of money and not everyone's on it. And I think especially when you're moving into some of those areas where perhaps LinkedIn is becoming a bit unpopular, I would definitely be thinking about using some of those other tools. Most of those tools are very much marketed as tools for finding tech candidates. But actually, seeing a tool like Open Web actually running other searches, it is smart enough to, to kind of to handle, people in any sector. So, yeah, I think I'd be looking at sort of putting some of those tools through their paces if I was running a recruitment team.
We're just negotiating our contract with Open Web at the moment, so I'd like to sort of put my 2 pennies worth in there. That it looks like an absolutely fantastic tool. Certainly some of the analytics that it generates as well, based on all the data that it's generated. So you can look for a specific skill set, and it'll tell you all the skill sets that are associated with that skill set, which helps sort of to diversify your search as well. I don't know if you saw that element of it, and the data they're collating against individual companies as well.
Yeah, so all those. They even have like some nice sort of graphics that appear on people's profiles, like telling you, how the different skills all fit together, and sort of, what sort of, I suppose, how many times people mention those skills on their profiles. So it's almost a nice way. It almost teaches the recruiter about how the industry works at the same time, because they can kind of see almost the makeup of their candidate's experience displayed sort of graphically and things. I think some of that information, some of the things they're doing with that information is really clever. So yeah, that notion of seeing the whole picture with somebody. I suppose historically I've always felt a little bit aggrieved at spending money on tools like that when I kind of know I can go out and build that picture myself with, just by sort of Googling and searching for people. But actually, to have some of that lifting done for you and some of that intelligence brought in, which would be much more difficult to do just yourself, they're really starting to get very smart. I agree. I think, yeah.
Well, and I think we'll come back to that. I'm just going to do a quick reset again, as we have about 15 minutes or so to go. This is Rec Hangout, where we're talking today about all things sourcing with the Sourceress, Katharine Robinson. Louis said I have to keep saying source every other word, so we're going to try sourcing where we find our sorcerers, I think. That might be a good question. Where do we find good sorcerers?
I wish I knew.
People ask me all the time. As Keith Robinson used to call you a sorcerer as opposed to a sorcerer. We've obviously ably supported by Mark Stevens of F10 Group, Tira, and Smart Recruit, Louise Triance from UK Recruiter, and Louis Welcomme from Colleague Software, and I'm Alan Whitford from Abtech Partnership and RC Euro. We've had some good debate. We've talked about LinkedIn. We've talked about other sourcing methodologies, about tools like Open Web and those sorts of sourcing aggregators, if you will. And there is the pure sourcing too. If we've had Johnny Campbell on, we've had Martin Lee on in the past. Martin, of course, would love us to sit down and all write the most amazing search strings ourselves. At the same time, though, he runs a website with all the free tools that you could ever want to put your hands on. Johnny and others have put together tool sets, so now you can go into Johnny's site and you can find a tool that will create all these complex search strings for you. Of course, you then, that's great, so I can put in my keywords and create a source string. I still have to know what to do with it afterwards. And I think, to me, that's one of the challenges. We can talk about, we can make your Boolean search for you, but then what? I now have these pages of lists of stuff, half of which may be from Indeed or some other source. What do I do with that list if I haven't been trained to even look through a Google results page and know what to do? How do I figure out which people I should look at? How do I know what of all of that information this great Boolean search has brought into me? How do I know what to do with it?
I think it's sort of an interesting debate, and I think I started off on the side of, well, everyone should just write their own strings, and if you don't understand what you're doing, then you shouldn't be doing it. But I've really kind of grown out of that, I think, lately, because it isn't. I mean, I think it's sort of my job to spend all day on the internet so that most people can be kind of getting on with real work. But it's true, you can waste a lot of time just sort of poking around on the internet looking for a name when actually, there are plenty of people you have in your own database that you could be, picking up the phone to. Most recruiters, I suppose, don't need to know the absolute ins and outs of writing their own Boolean strings. And if they get to the point where they're stuck with something and it would really help them to be able to run a good search for LinkedIn profiles through Google or whatever it is they want to be able to do, then those tools really help them do that quickly, and they are really quite effective. There is that question though, well, what if the results aren't what I was expecting? How do I then fix it? And yet that is much more difficult if you haven't written the string yourself, or if you didn't know how to write that string in the first place. It's then tricky to be able to just go in and take out the bit that seems to be throwing things off, or add a little bit extra in to take out the results that you don't want. And then I think recruiters can get a bit disillusioned with those tools, with the whole notion of writing search strings and things. It just seems like some really difficult thing when I don't really think it is. I mean, we all search Google on a day-to-day basis for things we want to buy, places we want to go, and we get on perfectly fine. I think if you use Google to a level that you will probably find something useful. And I think it's that step of when you go and start using a tool which does something with a search tool that you don't know how to do yourself. It's then difficult to sort of unpick when it goes wrong. But for the most part, those tools do work, and when they work, they're great. So yeah, I suppose use them. Give them a go. Try and break them. If you don't know what the search string is doing, ask someone. Send Johnny a tweet and say, why isn't this working? But I think for the most part they can save recruiters a lot of time. They don't need to go on they don't need to go and teach themselves how to write fantastic Boolean strings. If they just need help right now today to find someone to pick up the phone to, they can use one of those tools, and it's a big time saver. Yeah, so I don't think there's anything wrong with those things.
All right, and if you don't know where to find these tools that we're talking about, if you go into the colleaguesoftware.com website and look for the resources section, there's links to a number of different tool sets and recruiter resources that are there, and I'm sure that Louis will be happy to share the white papers and other elements as well. And Katharine, he may come back and pick your brains and say you need to write a white paper about your tips and tricks and get you into that resources handbook. Also to mention that following the show, Louise Triance does write a wrap-up of the show on UK Recruiter, and then we repost that up on rcero.com, and Mark, it usually ends up on the Tira site as well. So lots of different places to find the information we've talked about today. If you've been there busily scrabbling down your notes and scribbling away, you can slow down and you'll be able to find us and find all the information anyway. We've been asked one question, Louise. It's going to come from Mark, because he's just trying to see if we can get outside of the things. Louise does psychometric profiling, looks at things other than, say, skills. That takes us into that behavioral approach. Can we do direct sourcing and Google searching on behavioral attributes of candidates, or is it really only about skills?
Oh, that's really tough. I've never really thought about that. That's really interesting. That would be a challenge. I think there's always kind of been talk about picking up on the kind of language that candidates use to describe what they do. So I don't know whether things like that could be used to sort of help root out people with particular personalities. But yeah, that's really interesting. I'm not sure is the answer. I think I need to go away and have a bit of a think about that, and perhaps a chat with the person that asked the question and get to the bottom of exactly what they'd be looking for, because that could be an interesting topic for future discussions. Yeah.
So there we go, Louis. That might be a topic for our new series in the new year, which is a nice segue into what happens in the new year. Rec Hangout will be moving from every other week to once a month. Primarily because as a group we feel that we need to be able to provide more background and information to these shows and do a bit more promotion of them before the show itself, but also give us more time for the follow-up, for the white papers and the discussions after the shows as well. So we've appreciated everybody that's been with us this year every other week, and there's been a lot of you that have been here every show. But we think we can deliver a higher quality in 2015 by focusing once a month. And we might do the odd special based on an event or something as well, but that'll be the focus. So, Katharine, we'll have to bring you back next year when you figured out how we search for behavioral requirements. A shout out to Ben, who's working for a brewery, but somehow has found time today to watch the Rec Hangout. And thanks to Sourceress for great help. And it said the sourcing community is a very open community where people are willing to help each other. Would you say that's true, Katharine? That despite the visible competitiveness, you're all actually quite willing to share ideas and help with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I find, I have questions all the time, and I just sort of fire them out into the world, and somebody usually comes back with an answer for me. It's a really friendly and helpful community, and we all kind of share things with each other. There's groups on LinkedIn. I think you already mentioned Martin Lee has a group called Free Tools. Irina Shameva runs a group called Boolean Strings. I run a group on LinkedIn called UK Sourcers, and they're all places where you can go and just kind of ask a question, and someone will always kind of come back to you, and even if they just say, "Oh, I don't really know either," and kind of provide you a little bit of validation and support. Or somebody will usually make really useful suggestions. I know I've received a lot of help that way. So yeah, Ben's absolutely right. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Go ahead. So we're running down. We got about sort of 5-10 minutes left to go. Kind of that sort of part of the show where we like to put you back on the spot and go, okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things. What are those sort of 2 or 3 key lessons you would suggest to people that they should be taking away from, hey, get out there and do your own sourcing? That kind of just get out there and do it. Kind of have a go. I think has always been a bit of a motto. I think from coming back to something you mentioned earlier on about the SourceCon challenge, so many people it's a story people want to talk to me about, and they always go, "Oh, I could never do that," and I think, well, no, I couldn't really do it either. But I just had a go. So I think there's that notion of, well, if you're not trying, then there's no way that you can win. If you're not kind of trying to do some more of that direct sourcing and things, then you're not you'll never succeed at it. So
there's very, you can't really, the worst that can happen is, you upset somebody and they don't want to work for your company anymore. But you will learn a really valuable lesson. But you will learn some, you'll learn quickly and you'll be fine. So I think, have a go is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned. It's very difficult to break the internet as well. Kind of don't be frightened of trying something out, of signing up for new tools and sort of poking them with a stick. A lot of things I sign up for, I create an account, and then I go back a couple of times and then I never go back again because it didn't become the big thing, or the audience I was expecting to be there wasn't there. But kind of don't be afraid to sign up for things and sort of see what's going on and what's there and is it useful, and just kind of don't be frightened of breaking anything because you probably won't. And ask questions because everyone's really, really super helpful. So if you want to know how to do something, just ask one of the lovely internet sources. Somebody will help.
That's fantastic. Somebody will help. Well, I'd like to do, Katharine, it's been fantastic, and we're going to do a bit of a whip round now with our cohorts in crime here, just to a bit of a wrap, as it is our final show of 2014. I just like to ask Louise, Louis, and Mark, and they didn't know this was coming. What would you say has been your sort of a high point of the year, what you've most enjoyed about doing the Rec Hangouts with experts like Katharine, and what are you looking forward to in 2015? Not the total crystal ball bit, but more for Rec Hangout. And you know what, Mark, I'm going to come to you first.
Thanks, mate. I thought I'd get in there before Louis gave away all the best answers. I think this year's been quite good, getting insights from experts in each different field into how they operate, just getting little tips and tricks. I think I've walked away with 3 or 4 really good things from every hangout that we've done. As I'm in the technology space, I'm interested in what new technology is coming along to make life easier. And I suppose next year it's just waiting to see what's going to evolve, and if we're going to continue evolving at the same pace that we have done in the last sort of 12, 18 months, where there's been lots of really cool tech coming into market.
All right, Louis?
I'd echo that, Mark. It's been really useful. I mean, it's been fantastically good fun as well every other Wednesday, if not slightly stressful on occasions when the tech failed. I remember our very first hangout where none of the guests showed up.
We got Chris Smith in.
And we got Chris Smith on, which I'd love to get back because that was one of the funniest ones. But on a serious note, it's been very useful, very good feeding back all that I've learned to the technology guys here, the techies. It's been very good getting to know a lot of the guests, and also I've been very pleased to hear a lot of people on Twitter saying how useful they find it. People coming up to me at events saying how their whole company gets around to watch it, or at least watch the recording. And I'm hoping next year that we can really reach out to some more people by being able to focus a bit more on one a month and spread the word a bit more.
I thought it was just us.
Yes, usually just that 5. Spread the word and get more people involved. So, and thank you very much to you, Alan, for doing a great job at hosting.
Yeah, well done, Al.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Now, Louise, you've been trying to be invisible back there, but we are going to make you talk now as well. What about for you? What's been the best bits, and what are you looking forward to next year?
I've enjoyed not actually being visible for the entire year. We're not entirely happy about speaking now. It's been absolutely fabulous. I've loved doing it. I think that going to one a month is going to be a great move for us. It's a shame because there's loads of great speakers I think we'd like to get involved, and of course it will make it more difficult if we're only doing 12 next year. But I think it will give us more time to promote them before. And the other thing I've really enjoyed doing is those follow-up blog posts, because it's brought together information that our guests have shared, plus other things that perhaps I wouldn't have ordinarily found, but we've managed to bring together for people. So no, I've loved them.
Well, thank you, Louise, and thanks you to my 3 co-hosts. I found it's been very engaging. We've had some great guests on, like Katharine and others through the years. We've had through the months. We've had some guests that were very controversial. We've had others who maybe seemed a little bit traditional, but we've managed to get them out of their shell. Certainly technology, this Google Plus Hangout thing is actually pretty cool. You know, I think one time we had 8 or 9 people live at one time. You know, a bit like herding cats for me, but it's been a blast. We've all had times where our technology has failed, where, you know, I've sat in a car or I've sat with my back sitting next to the router. You know, Louis now is in this amazing place. It's a control tower, so there's no interference for him. He can actually see the world, and the world can see him. He's got direct line of sight to all sorts of tech. I think, Katharine, I want to thank you for closing out the series with that bit of Christmas cheer, you know, just to show that we do have a lighter side to us as well. So to all of my fans, my friends, the non-fans out there, we've had some interesting comments on Twitter and other channels. And I also want to thank my brother-in-law for actually pitching in today and saying that he would have paid for this stuff. I appreciate that Mitch and that Joe actually were piling in from outside, trying to help us promote what we're up to.
And thank you to Barocca Boost for all the supplies you send us this year.
Thank you, Katharine. Thanks, guys. Good ending, Mark. Okay. Next till January.
All right, Louis, over to you for the final wrap.
Oh, another wrap up. Okay, well.
Yeah, well, you can do the wrap and tell people where they can find the info and where they find us next.
Okay, so there'll be the follow-up blog on the UK Recruiter blog. There'll be something on SlideShare summarising this whole hangout and the best quotes from it. That'll be really useful for anyone wanting a summary overview. And keep a lookout on the colleague blog, the webinar section, for announcements about our next hangout series starting sometime in January. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.